Have you heard of semiconductors? They are devices that are hidden to the eye, but present in almost all electrical equipment around us. Our topic for this video, AMD, or Advanced Micro Devices Inc., is a giant semiconductor company based in Santa Clara, California. Like many other companies, AMD has gone through some lean periods, or dire periods to be accurate. They came very close to bankruptcy during the early 2010s, but they turned it around. And so today, we will talk about the rise and fall and the comeback of AMD. Fun fact, do you know what the world's fastest computer, Tesla cars, and Mars rover have in common? It's AMD. These are all run using chips produced by AMD. Now that you have an idea of AMD's prowess, let's talk about its humble beginnings. AMD was founded by Jerry Sanders on May 1, 1969. He, along with some colleagues, broke off from Fairchild Semiconductors and set up AMD. Right from the beginning, the company showed sharp decision-making. Their first strategic step was to become a licensed second-source manufacturer for Fairchild Semiconductors. During the early years of semiconductors, no manufacturer of electronic devices wanted to depend on a single source. They tied up with semiconductor companies only after ensuring that a secondary source for manufacturing semiconductors was already identified by the primary manufacturer. Although AMD did not have the resources of Fairchild, or even Intel, they guaranteed quality control at par with United Military Standards. By November 1969, they manufactured their product, the AM9300, which began selling in 1970. Its expertise and quality guarantee meant a good market right from the outset, in an industry that had few players and a huge demand. The stars were aligning for AMD. On the back of some successful launches like the AM2505, the fastest multiplier available, and AM3101, a 64-bit bipolar RAM, the company ended 1971 with a revenue of $4.6 million. On the back of a strong revenue and good product launches, AMD went public in 1972. By 1975, AMD was making over 212 products, with around 50 that were developed in-house. But something even more instrumental for AMD's future happened in 1975. You see, Intel had already launched the world's first microprocessor in 1971. AMD decided to reverse engineer Intel's 8080 microprocessor and succeeded. In 1975, AMD launched its first microprocessor, AM9080. The development of this microprocessor brought financial success to AMD in more ways than one. Faced with this new challenge, Intel soon decided to make AMD a second source for its chip manufacturing. Starting in October 1976, the two companies entered into a cross-licensing agreement. AMD was given the right to manufacture and sell the 8008 microprocessor. The next phase for AMD was its entry into microcomputer development and manufacturing. Siemens purchased a 20% stake in the new company called Advanced Microcomputers, or AMC. However, the venture didn't last long as the two companies were divergent in their visions. Siemens eventually sold its share in the American business to AMD. Through the 80s, a lot of what AMD was doing was commissioned by Intel. The relationship began to sour when AMD felt that they were being deliberately kept away from information concerning the 386 chips that Intel was developing. They filed an antitrust lawsuit against Intel in 1991, claiming that Intel was trying to create a computer chip monopoly. AMD won the lawsuit and was granted $10 million and a royalty-free license to all Intel patents used in AMD's own x86-style processors. This was not going to be the last legal battle between the two companies. The sour relationship continues to the present day. By the way, did you know that, like AMD, Intel was founded by former employees of Fairchild Semiconductors too? If only Fairchild had taken employee retention seriously. Having won the 1991 lawsuit, AMD developed newer and better products. AMD beat Intel to the production of the first 1 GHz processor and the first 1 teraflop GPU, a GPU that could handle 1 trillion calculations per second. Despite the impressive growth of AMD, Intel was still, by far, the bigger of the two companies, controlling up to 84% of the PC market in 1997 and around 70% today. AMD found it a better strategy to acquire companies and diversify their product lines. In 2006, AMD bought ATI for $4.2 billion upfront and a further $1.2 billion. ATI was a Canadian semiconductor technology company that dealt with graphic processing units and chipsets. This allowed AMD to enter the GPU market in a meaningful way. Today, it controls about 13% market share in the GPU business, lagging behind NVIDIA. However, at the time, the purchase was a huge financial drain and a big risk to the company's well-being. Intel continued producing a number of high-performance chips, like the Core i series and the Sandy Bridge chips. AMD tried to counter this with its FX Bulldozer series, launched in 2011. The performance of the Bulldozer series, though, was disappointing. To make matters worse for AMD, they were sued over their claims about the FX Bulldozer series. Not to get too technical, but the complaint questioned AMD's claim that the latest chipset had an 8-core processor. The plaintiffs claimed it functioned as a 4-core processor. The argument against the processor was upheld because AMD's design meant that the cores had to share resources. This diluted the chip's processing ability, not allowing it to function as a true 8-core. AMD had to settle by paying the users of the chipsets $12.1 million. Now, one thing about the semiconductor industry is that it takes years to develop a new chip. This process involves a certain amount of guesswork. Simply put, manufacturers like AMD have to bet on what a customer will require in 2 to 3 years' time before even beginning the development of the chip. With the failure of the Bulldozer series, AMD literally gave no competition to Intel for many years. Due to this, they posted a $155 million loss in 2014 and a $481 million loss in 2015. They had to lay off around 25% of their workforce during this period, with share prices reaching all-time lows. Things were not looking good for AMD, but nothing matters more than the present, right? The turnaround for AMD began in 2014 when it appointed Lisa Su as the new CEO. She immediately decided on the key areas of focus, diluting the attention AMD paid to business verticals that did not match with AMD's core competencies. For example, the Internet of Things vertical was seen as promising for the future, but was removed from key focus areas because of this streamlining. They decided to focus on high-performance computing, like the data center business, which is a huge source of revenue for AMD today. Jim Keller was put in charge of handling the design for its new and ambitious Ryzen microarchitecture. Chips based on the Ryzen model would be AMD's answer to Intel's chips. The focus of the Ryzen model was to provide an architecture that provided easy scalability for chips with different numbers of core processors. A one-design-fits-all model. An important stepping stone towards improving the chip designs was to invest money in research and development. To make this happen, AMD first created a joint venture in the form of global foundries to manufacture their chips, instead of a wholly owned manufacturing division. Soon after this, they decided to further outsource manufacturing to TSMC, the world's leading chip manufacturer, leaving global foundries to manufacture the most basic chip designs. Chip manufacturing units are extremely expensive, and outsourcing this allowed AMD to pump this money into its core competency, chip design. When the new Zen chips were launched in 2017, they had to undergo a few tweaks based on the market response. Once the changes were incorporated into the design, the Ryzen-based microprocessors were outperforming their Intel counterparts. With the continued success of the Zen chips, AMD saw a stock price increase of over 13,000%. Lisa Su and her team had turned lemons into lemonade. However, the future is still challenging because of a few factors. One amongst them is the decline in PC sales over the last few years. Another major challenge is companies like Google, Apple, etc. designing their own chips. Even the chip architecture used so far is undergoing a change, with companies moving to the ARM architecture rather than the x86 architecture currently used by AMD. There is also a geopolitical pressure to reduce sales to China, a significant purchaser of AMD chips. AMD has been planning for these challenges. One of its steps was to acquire Xilinx, a maker of reprogrammable chips called FPGAs. These chips are used for robotics, in space stations, cars and cameras, medical systems, and agricultural equipment, and 20% of its sales now come from FPGAs. They are also working more closely with companies to develop customized chips to help them solve their business problems to avoid a scenario where past clients are all designing their own chips. Along that, they have doubled down on their focus on data center management with the acquisition of Pensando, a data center optimization company. So far, these next steps seem to hold AMD in a good stead. What the future holds, we have to wait and see. The AMD story teaches us that sometimes the key to success is streamlining and taking some downtime to reassess your strengths. Big decisions often come in the shape of small changes with huge impacts. So, are you impressed with Lisa Su, the charismatic leader of the AMD turnaround? Do you think AMD can ever catch up to Intel in terms of revenue and market dominance? Comment below and tell us. We love hearing from you. Also, tell us what other companies you want us to cover, and maybe we'll make a video on that next. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content on some of your favorite companies. And hit that bell icon so that you're notified every time we drop a fresh video. See you next time.